In this video, I'll be talking with Jeff Bregema. He's been recruiting technical talent for large companies for over 7 years. We pull back the curtain and explain what goes on the other side when you apply for software development jobs online, how the application selection process actually works, what you can do to get past the automated screening programs to get calls back on the great jobs you apply for, and avoid your application disappearing into the dreaded void of nothingness. So let's start with this one. Where does it go? What happens? Like, what's going on the other side there?
Yeah, no, I 100% get it. And especially now in my scenario starting to apply for jobs, I realize that some of those ATS systems aren't great. I hate when they can't pull from the resume and you gotta go in and then retype it all up, but your resume is still attached. That is very annoying. But I think industry standard wise, typically an individual should hear back within 2 weeks. I mean, that is the goal of a recruiter, is to be able to get back with them in 2 weeks. And it's either getting back with them to schedule that first initial phone screen, or it's at least getting that auto-generated message saying like, hey, you were not selected for the role. So at least they get something and they're aware. I mean, that is what we try to do. Throughout our days, sometimes you get busy and you don't get to it within that 2 week span, which is on us. But most of the time, we definitely try to do our best. Some of the things that I would recommend doing, if say you applied and it's a week out, I'd at least give them a week. But if say it's a week out, I would definitely reach out to them on LinkedIn. I would say 99.9% of recruiters are on LinkedIn. If they're not on LinkedIn, they're probably not the best recruiter out there, because I mean, majority of your talent sits on LinkedIn. So when you have to go in and passively search for individuals that haven't actively applied, I would take that route, especially nowadays. In the last position that we had open at Haggerty for a full stack developer that I remember working on, I think we had over 130 applicants. It was around 130 to 145, somewhere in that ballpark. And as a recruiter, you work with the hiring managers. They work with the hiring managers to filter through those resumes and try to find, some individuals that they want to interview. And typically when you only have one position, you're going to probably pull the top 20 people that you see or that you feel like that align. And then you're going to run those phone screens. But when you're trying to pick from 130, 140 people, I mean, some people do get lost. But that's why I would reach out on LinkedIn, because, I mean, that's how you and Jim got in contact with me. You reached out on LinkedIn and asked to set up a conversation. And when someone is actively pursuing it, shows that they have interest and that, they really do care about this position, because you get the people that apply to a ton of jobs at one given time. But when you have the people that are actively pursuing an organization and a role, as a recruiter, that's much more enticing for you to want to set up those calls and try to pursue them for that position.
All right, so you bring up two interesting questions. The first thing I've heard is that when people are applying and a job first comes open, that's the time to apply, because that's when people are looking at the resumes. And then after, it wanes for like a week or two and you apply, maybe they're not looking at them. So on the other side, you said that stack of 135. Are you guys looking at the first stack that come through, the middle ones? Is there a filtering system? Is it automated by a computer, or how does that work?
Yeah, so a lot of times, depending on the ATS system that the company's utilizing, I've used proprietary back in the staffing world. We use Salesforce back in the staffing world. Haggerty uses Workday, for example. There's different filtering options you can utilize, and it depends on how the recruiter sets up that job posting, because they'll work typically with someone in HR, whether they do it themselves and post those jobs, or they work with someone that's on the team that does all the job postings for them. You can typically set up a specific skills section and put in those skills that you would tend to see on a resume in that skill section of a resume. And you can filter by that. And like for Workday, for example, it'll have a column that says like skills matched and skills that are not matched. So ones that aren't listed on the resume that we are looking for. So a lot of times you'll see those two separate columns there. That's Workday, for example. Obviously Salesforce is a little bit different, but typically all the ATS systems can be set up in a similar fashion.
Okay, you just blew my mind already. So let's go into the skills part. So as someone applying, like, where am I putting these skills? Are they reading them from my resume? Are they reading them from my job history, or what are they reading them from?
I would say I would always put them on both. So like if it's a not as user friendly ATS system, and you have to go in and type it in as well as your resume. I would make sure if it's on your resume, you also add it in when you type it in. But the biggest thing is if you put those skills on your resume that an organization is looking for, in a full stack role, obviously there's going to be a stack that the company is looking for. Whatever that stack is, you're going to want to make sure you have that exact stack on your resume, or one that is similar in nature, that is can kind of cross over, has a lot of the same fundamentals to it. But you're going to want to have it, make sure it's in that resume under those jobs, because that's the biggest thing that we will tend to see as a recruiter and a hiring manager is someone will put those skills in that skill section, and then you go to their actual jobs and you don't see them in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's typically when they get filtered out, because we see those words in the skills section a lot, and we just see them as buzzwords. Like, okay, someone's putting these up here as buzzwords to try to get more hits on the resume and more interviews. Whereas we'll tend to look at the actual experience in that resume and try to pick out where those skills are in the resume, where they actually did the specific work, whether it's a real, like an actual professional job, or it's on various projects. Because I know a lot of people put projects on their resumes, especially in development type roles, which are very transferable as well.
Mm-hmm. So when you say projects, to somebody out there who's maybe doesn't have as much experience, so if they go and they do a project on the side, so say maybe during the day they're a Java developer, but they want to go to a place and work in Python or something. So if on the side they do Python development, they list that on their resume, that will help them get kind of filtered at least to the next step maybe? Or what are your thoughts on that?
It definitely probably would help you get filtered to the next steps. We've seen a high uptick in individuals that go to a lot of the coding boot camps that are out there. And a lot of that work, especially, we just recently hired an associate developer, and we brought him from one of those coding boot camps. But a lot of that experience that we were looking for, he actually laid out into various projects that he had did at that coding boot camp into his resume. And throughout the interview process, he showed great aptitude, and we felt like he would be a great fit, and he was very coachable, and we'd be able to bring him on board and get him trained up very quickly. So I wouldn't hesitate to put on any project type work or at home type work that an individual is doing.
That is absolutely fantastic. I love that idea, because then you could, a lot of people, for example, say you work in just one job for a while. A lot of times you don't get to branch out and do different skills. You just literally every day, Java, 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 Java. So if you want to move into something else, a lot of times you apply, and even if you have 8 years experience, they'll kick you back because you don't have the right skill set. Okay.
Yeah.
This is, first of all, this is worth it already, because this is kind of opening up some doors for me that I see how the other side works.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you're going and you're applying, a lot of jobs will give you the option for a cover letter. So I guess one strategy you have is, do you make a perfect cover letter, or do you worry just about a great resume, or like, what's the best way to optimize when you're applying?
So this probably has a lot of personal preference that comes with it too. But based on my experience and the hiring managers I worked with at Haggerty, we never once really looked at a cover letter, to be 100% honest. We always went straight to the resume, because we wanted to see the actual experience. Like our viewpoint of an individual applying is, you want to be a part of this organization. There's a reason that you're applying for this role. Mm-hmm. Typically, when you write a cover letter, you're telling them why you want to come work for this organization, why you'd be a fit for the role. Mm-hmm. So for me as a recruiter, if you're applying to Haggerty, I feel like you have some sort of interest in the organization already, because you're applying. So we go straight to the resume and look to see like what skills best align for what we are looking for. Like, what is that experience in that resume that stands out to us, that we're like, we want to go interview these individuals. So I didn't really ever look at cover letters when people applied with them.
Okay, so overall, just in your opinion, then you could probably save yourself the time and make yourself a resume that's really detailed. And that was actually my next question I was going to ask. Is I've talked to people who do it both ways, where they make kind of a generic resume with their experience and they fire it out to like 1,000 different places. But then I've also talked to ones who are like, I want this job. So they spend like a day crafting their resume to match exactly what the job description has. So overall, is there one strategy that's better than the other?
I guess it depends on what the individual's what they're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to go out and just obtain a job because you're looking for that experience, or
Uh-huh.
you are in a scenario where you need a job, I mean, creating that generic resume that lays out everything that you've done and you just throw it out there to 1,000 jobs, um, you'll probably get a hit. I mean, obviously, numbers. If you ran the numbers on it, you got a pretty good shot at it. But if there's a company that stands out, like any organization out there, say you want to go get a job at Amazon, obviously if it's something that is very important to you, that organization is very important. I would try to make a more specific resume at that point in time. I mean, I wouldn't start from the ground up. I would take that generic resume because it's going to have pretty much everything on there already, and just make it a little more detailed towards that specific job. I always say that initial resume you want to build, you're going to want to build a more generic one anyways, because you may be applying to a lot of different jobs that have different stacks, and then you can kind of critique it per each job.
Oh, that's really good. So then, as far as making a good resume, we already talked about including the skills on there. So let's go through two parts. There's that little top section, actually three parts.
Yeah.
The top section where you say, da da da, I want to make computer software that's better, blah blah blah, for a company. Is there a point in even putting that, or is that just a waste of space?
Um, I'd say it's almost a waste of space at this point in time, except for when you're looking at technical type roles.
Uh-huh.
Now, other industries, it's probably a little different, but more on the technical space, we don't even read that objective line.
Okay.
I mean, we pretty much skip right over it. Because I've reviewed a ton of, like, I always reviewed resumes with my hiring managers.
Uh-huh.
I liked having them right there so they could see what we were looking at and looking at who we were going to hire. And most of the time they went straight to the skills, and then they went straight to that experience. And they really wanted to understand, nitty gritty, what had they been doing at their various roles, or if no one's had a position yet and they come out of a coding boot camp, what were those projects that they were doing? Like, what was the nitty gritty of those projects? And I think a big deterrent for managers is when you have individuals that spread their resume out to, I've seen upwards of 8-page
Oh my.
resumes. And at that point, it's a little excessive. Now,
So,
like, I would say the max you would ever want to go is probably 4, is the very max.
jeez.
And even then, it gets to be a lot. You want to look at your most recent experience. If your most recent experience, you have a lot of the experience that the company is looking for, that you're applying to, really build out that experience and make it specific and direct to what this role is going to entail.
Nice.
And obviously the other big thing is recruiters don't like to see not a break, but like a ton of jobs on top of each other.
Okay.
Like 6 months to a year, 6 months to a year, 6 months to a year. They like to see that tenure. Obviously, when it comes to like contract type work, or if someone is working 1099 for themselves, doing contracts for other organizations,
Uh-huh.
that's different in that scenario, because you would basically put your own LLC at the top and put all the different companies you contracted for over that time. But yeah, definitely keep them to 4 pages. Definitely have the skills section. You can put a little small objective in there, maybe like a 2-3 sentence objective of kind of yourself and what you do. But really build out the experience portion of it with the skills that you put in that skill section.
That's beautiful. You touched on something that I talked to someone else on an interview about, was the job hopping part, because it's always super sexy to job. So you're making a salary at this place, in 9 months you jump to the next one. So you said, like, what's a good tenure that at some point you look at the resume and you go, nah, they move jobs too often, because if they move the last 3 jobs quickly, probably going to move on yours, right? Or am I wrong about that?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's and I feel like the more experience the recruiter gets, the more of an intuition. You have a gut feeling. You can really get a gut feeling from someone from talking to them and understanding like why an individual left their last role to move on to another organization. That really gives you a lot of great insight. But like industry wise, like IT's industry standard for tenure right now is 24 months, 2 years.
Uh-huh.
Is like the typical tenure you're seeing out of an individual before they're moving to their next role. So like for me, seeing 2 years, that doesn't phase me. I'm like, yeah, perfect. We can move forward with this person. They don't raise any red flags or anything like that. Whereas someone like in accounting, they'd probably be like, oh no, 2 years. We can't touch this. I need to see 10 to 15.
That is awesome. That is absolutely awesome. Okay, okay. You sparked another thing in my head there. Okay, let's talk boot camps. So I've heard
Yeah.
mixed results from people in boot camps. The fact that they pay an ungodly amount of money for like 12, 15 weeks, something like that. Do they need to do something to bridge themselves? Because after you get done with the boot camp, you can't really be a productive member of a team. Like you show up and the company's
Yeah.
going to know they're going to have to like spoon feed you for a while. So do a lot of people get hired out of boot camps, or do they need to do something to bridge that gap?
Um, we've actually hired a lot recently into Haggerty. I think the biggest thing, if you're coming out of a boot camp, the best roles to search for when you're looking on Indeed or you're looking on LinkedIn or you're looking on Dice, whatever platform you're searching for jobs on, is to always start out with the title associate, whatever, front end,
Oh,
back end, full stack. Associate's going to be your best bet to be able to get your foot in the door with an organization. That's where I would start. Number one spot is starting out with associate, whatever, front, back end, full stack, whatever it is. Then the next part of that is reaching out on LinkedIn is huge, directly to recruiters. People coming out of boot camps. I worked in the industry. I don't want to go back to working in the industry because I just don't want to. But your staffing agencies are a good point of contact to go to get that foot in the door, even though they're not always, it's not always necessarily what you're looking for. But say you can get a quick 6-month contract on your resume, or even a 3-month contract where you're actually in a corporate environment working on a team. Maybe it's just a contract because you have to develop a project for 3 months to help get something stood up, or you're making a change or you're doing a refresh. That is really good experience to get on your resume. Not all staffing companies are bad. I
uh-huh.
mean, I came from one, I worked at one, I thought I was a great recruiter at the staffing organization, but they get a bad rep at times. But I think that's a good opportunity to gain that experience, or at least be able to try to obtain that experience. Um, and just, I mean, don't be afraid to apply and don't be afraid to reach out. I mean, when I had my full stack developer role with Haggerty, we actually we wanted to hire 2 individuals, and they both came out of a boot camp. The one was fresh out of a boot camp and had maybe 6 months to a year of contract work that he did for a staffing agency. And the other individual came out of his boot camp and was doing some like freelance stuff on the side for whether it was friends or family members or other individuals. Like he'd built websites for his a family's company, and done some stuff on the side that he had developed and built on his own, like his project type work, just to try to continue to get better at his actual coding. And then from there, they both went into interviews and just did really well. They came off, when you're that junior, and really anybody that's interviewing organizations, are the main thing they're looking for is someone that is coachable and is going to fit into that culture, and is going to be a good fit. Those are the things, those are the uncoachables, the unteachables. We individuals, you could probably teach me how to code in a couple months, whereas you couldn't teach me to be personable enough to be a recruiter.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, so you talked about LinkedIn a little bit, and that is how we met, because I was at the time when I was job searching, I was hopping around looking at places. I messaged you back, went on a call, had a great call. So for people out there though, so say we're just applying to, let's just say Amazon or Google, right?
Yeah.
And I go on LinkedIn, I got a job, say I applied on Indeed or wherever else. How do I know which recruiter to contact? Like, I know I'll look for technical recruiter, but like, what do I do after that?
Yeah. So when you reach out to, typically you would search technical recruiter or IT recruiter, and it would pull out. Amazon has a ton of them. I have a couple of friends that work over there in recruiting, and they've got a lot of them, and they're actually very siloed, depending on organizations. Haggerty, we only had a couple of us, so we kind of split the company into two. You typically will have someone that works more on the applicate, like your core app side of the house, and someone that works more on the infrastructure side. Companies like your Googles and Amazons, they're very siloed into like specific like project managers or business analysts to straight developers for X product. So I would probably reach out to any of the recruiters at first and just say, hey, I applied for this role. This is something I'm very interested in. Are you the recruiter that is aligned to this position? And a lot of the times they'll say, no, I'm not the one that's aligned to this position. So and so is.
Okay. So then you can go contact that person directly on LinkedIn.
Yep. Yeah, we had that happen a lot. When I was at Haggerty, we had a lot of people that would reach out and say, is this your position? And I was like, or they'd reach out asking me about the role. And I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not aligned to this. I don't have any clue what's going on, but please reach out to XYZ on my team because she's the individual running with it and she knows all about it and she can give you all the information. And so I'll send them to her, but I'll also message her too. So she's not like caught off guard when they say, hey, Jeff told me to reach out to you.
Okay. So how many roles are you recruiting for at once, just generally? Because you said you spend time going through resumes with a hiring manager. I assume you can't be recruiting for like 10 roles at once, or how does it work?
It depends. So, like the sweet number for a recruiter is typically to have about 10 open positions is like the sweet number to be at. You don't typically want to be over it. Under it, you'll get bored. And when I say like I like to look at them with hiring managers, but I also do a lot on my own, and we'll just send them over, schedule calls. But like there's times when a company that is in a big time growing phase, and I mean, I've had anywhere from 17 to almost 20 open positions at any given time, where that's a lot. I mean,
Oh,
it's hard to manage at that point in time unless they're all similar in nature.
uh-huh.
Which typically on the core app side of the house, they tend to be all development roles. You're all full stacks, front ends or back ends. So you can basically take those 20 roles and essentially say you have 5 open positions because they all can kind of cross over, or at least a couple of them can cross over in certain scenarios. Whereas sometimes when you have the recruiter on the infrastructure side of the house that's recruiting on security, network engineers, data engineers, all across the board, that's when it gets a lot more difficult. But yeah, recruiters will have anywhere from typically 10 to 20 at any given time.
Okay, so I can imagine that makes them pretty busy, and that's probably why when you call them, sometimes they're just not available to magically take your call and call you back.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, so let's talk about actual phone call. So you've
Yep.
applied for a job, you got a call back that said, hey, we want to talk to you on a screening phone call. So very first question that you usually get is, why are you looking? What are some of the responses that some people give you that you go, not so good, and some other ones you go, yeah, that makes sense? Because I assume you don't win the job on that answer, but you could probably really lose it, right?
Yeah, you definitely can. And typically the ones that the answers I like to hear are around growth. Like I don't have any growth opportunities where I'm at. Like I'm not able to obtain any career progression, or the training's not there, or the training's not available for me. The ones that really give me that initial like yellow flag, I have my concerns,
Uh-huh.
is anytime anyone talks about looking for more money, anytime someone says that they don't don't like the organization or don't like the people they work with or don't get along with somebody,
Uh-huh.
um, those are usually the real red flags. Anything that can come off as negative, I would completely stay away from, even if you don't mean for it to be negative. But if it has any potential to be perceived as a negative, those are going to raise a flag, and a recruiter will typically ask more questions around it.
Interesting. So
Um,
I love that idea, though. That means anytime you're on there, as long as you can say something along the lines of, at last place I wasn't able to do X, so I'm looking to do that. That sets
yeah.
a good tone for you then?
Oh yeah. Anyone that's looking to like expand on their skill set, anyone obviously now like cloud is a big initiative. So anyone that's not able to work in the cloud with their current employer because they're stuck on prem with some legacy apps, obviously those are the ones that you're like, that doesn't even raise a concern at all, and it makes sense. It's like, okay, this person wants to continue to learn, they want to continue to grow. I mean, they're looking to they're eager. Those are the eager type of individuals that you really look for.
Okay, and I'm going to do a quick side question, but then after that, I got a really good
Yep.
question. Okay, so in my previous role, the first role that I was at, I was Mr. Azure. I was living in Azure, Microsoft, this and that. When I talk to
Mhm.
places, they'd go, "Oh, well, you have cloud experience. It's Azure experience, but we're looking for, fill in the provider, Google Cloud,
Yeah.
AWS." And they go, "I don't know. Do you really want to work in that?" And you go, I applied for the job, right? Like I'm not here by accident.
Yeah.
But like, is there a barrier just because you learned one thing that companies go, well, we want to stay away from them because we want someone that already knows this or what?
No, I think especially when you talk about the cloud, they're all very transferable. You mean you look at Azure, you look at AWS, you look at Google. Um, there are small nuances between all of them, but they're all very similar in nature. For myself, I don't care what title is on the cloud. Cloud, it could be anything cloud, whatever. I don't
Yeah.
care because I know they're transferable in nature, and I don't need someone that specifically has worked in AWS and has only been in AWS. Like uh, I'm I'm more than happy to hire someone that has good Azure experience. I mean, we used to do it all the time, especially in the data engineering space. Someone that had only kind of worked in that Azure cloud environment from a data engineering perspective, we hired them and brought them into Haggerty, even though we were 100% AWS cloud. I mean, for us, that didn't really matter at all. Or for
Very,
myself, it definitely doesn't. It doesn't matter to me at all either.
well, very cool. Okay, so here's the tough one. So you applied for the job, you got the call, you're on the phone
Yeah.
screening interview, and they say the question that really kind of drives people crazy. They say, "What salary are you making currently right now, and what salary are you looking for?"
Yeah.
What's the correct power play? Like I got some opinions on it, but I want to hear
Oh,
yours.
the correct power play is you just asked me an illegal question
Yeah.
because you actually can't ask anybody about their salary history.
Oh,
Um,
really? I didn't even know that. Okay.
as of a couple of years ago, they put a law in place that you can't ask someone salary history. So if
Uh-huh.
they ask you what you're currently making or what you previously made,
Uh-huh.
I might steer away from that recruiter in general.
Okay.
But I hate that question as a recruiter. I don't typically ask it directly. I'll tend to tell them what the range of the role is because I would rather be upfront and honest. And I think the best recruiters out there are upfront and honest. And I'll tell someone the whole range. If it say we'll just use easy numbers, it's 100 to 120.
Uh-huh.
And I'll tell them, the range we have is 100 to 120, but based on your level of experience and the amount of years you have, we're probably going to bring you in with an offer around 105 to 110 because you're not at the senior end of it. And if you're upfront and honest, I think you get more respect from the individual on the other end of the phone. But when you get in those scenarios of where a recruiter asks you that question, I would just turn around and tell them like, I don't wish to disclose where I'm currently at from a salary perspective. Um, I would put it back on that recruiter and say, what is the range for this role? And then you can go back and base it and say, my salary is like somewhere in the middle or the low end or the high end or however you want to go about doing it. Um, but I hate that question. I don't like asking it as a recruiter because I feel like you lose a lot of respect from the individual you're talking to when you ask them what their expectations are.
See, that was one of my favorite things. I think you were the only person, maybe one other person I talked to who just said, "Oh, the job range is this," and I go, "Oh, cool." So we're out of the way on
Yeah,
what that's going to be because
yeah.
I get a lot of them that say, "So what are you looking for?" And so kind of my
Oh, yeah.
thing, I always did was I just kind of looked at the range for my job and how much experience I had. Then I always bumped it up a little bit because I always
Yep.
figured if I say 100 to 120, they're going to be like, "Cool, we'll get you in 100," right? But
Yeah.
so that's
Yep.
my other.
Typically, and that's why recruiters get a bad rap too a lot of times because they just won't go in and say what the range is. I think as a recruiter, they should be knowledgeable enough to look at a resume and get a general understanding of where somebody is at. And flip side, and someone that if you're interviewing for a role, there's a lot of great tools out there that you can go to on the internet to try to get a feel for what that role is paying. Whether are you currently in that range? Are in and the flip side of that too, maybe you're already on the high side of the range for that type of role. So when you come in an interview, and say it's a company that is extremely enticing to you, don't be shocked if that number comes in a little bit lower because you're already at the high side of the range. I think, well, there's a lot of them out there. Obviously, you can use like Glassdoor. Levels is another one. And there's a lot of great sites out there that will pull market data for you.
Interesting. So the person I'm talking to on the other end of the phone probably has a number range in front of them that they already know, right?
100%. They have a
Uh,
range that was given to them by the compensation team, and then they have an exact budgeted amount that they're trying to hit.
Okay, so we're not just making up fake numbers. They actually have
No.
dollars and cents on the other side. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So that brings me to my next one, and I've wondered this. Very rarely do you make a move just to be a lateral move. So say you're like in a mid-level
Mm-hmm.
role, you don't just go, "Well, I better go get another mid-level role." You want to move up to like a senior role, and that's I think everyone's always trying to climb that ladder. How do you get people to buy into you at the next level? So say you're a mid-level engineer and you want to apply for that senior role. Like, how do you stand out on maybe your resume, and then if you do get a call, how do you convince them to be like, yes, we will hire a mid as a senior? Because don't you just if you have a senior role, you just want a senior, right?
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends. I mean, it really does depend. I think it depends on the individual that you're interviewing, and some of the non-coachables, like we were talking about, if they have some of those, and it depends on the manager too, but they would bring you on at a senior level, even if you feel like you're a mid-level.
Uh-huh.
I would go into the interview selling yourself like you're a senior level individual. I mean, if you feel like your technical abilities are there and you just don't have the title of it, I mean, sell yourself as a senior level individual. Obviously, don't lie and put on your resume, because if they do a reference check, and a lot of companies will only do an employment check, but they'll tell you the title and the dates they were there. So don't lie on the resume. But they'll bring you on as a senior level. And a lot of times when you look at someone that's in a senior level role, they are very proficient when it comes to coding. But a lot of times they're looking for them to be more of that mentor and coach to the more junior level individuals. So if you're looking to get to that senior level role, maybe try to get some of that stuff in the current organization that you're in. Even as a mid-level, try to train some of the brand new people, try to collaborate more, try to ask for those mentoring type of opportunities, or just take it under your belt, because that's essentially what makes a person a senior level. Someone that can coach and mentor and is a proficient coder.
Wow,
And
nice.
then when you go into those interviews, you can explain all that stuff and you put it on your resume. Like, I was coaching, I was mentoring. And a lot of times, like as a recruiter, I mean, I'm not going to be able to judge someone's proficiency as a coder, but I can judge somebody's ability to coach, mentor, and train, and ask the baseline technical questions to say, yeah, they're probably pretty proficient. I'm going to pass them along to the hiring manager.
Nice. Okay, so let's go back to that phone interview. So you talk about coachable and a cultural fit. Are
Yeah.
there, I know you literally said it's something that you can't just learn, but there's a lot of developers out there who kind of are a little bit, what's the word to say? A little bit quirky, eccentric sometimes, right? And
Yeah.
so are there some things they can do to make themselves a little more coachable during the interview process, or at least appear to be more coachable?
I think where they kind of stumble on interviews, individuals, and I feel like everyone that I've ever recruited for or hired in IT in general, every person in general has their own quirkiness and their own differences.
Mhm.
It's just being the confidence piece. Like, go into an interview and be confident in what you're saying, be confident in what you're talking about, be confident in and your abilities and your skills. If you show and demonstrate that confidence in that interview, then none of that like quirkiness is going to come out.
Yeah.
That'll all be hidden. Obviously, like, showing that you're coachable will come through some of the questions that a recruiter will ask, which will technically be, or not technically, but will be like, when's an instance that you've had a disagreement with a coworker, and how are you able to work through that scenario? Or what's a time where you ran into a scenario and you were completely stumped and had no idea the solution, but how were you able to go back and work through that? Was it, talking to an individual, going to a forum, watching a YouTube, but how were you able to work your way around that type of scenario? Like when you have really good answers to those questions, that's what recruiters and managers and people really like is having a good example, and they don't want a fluff answer to it. It's like we've all had disagreements. We've all had difficult conversations with coworkers. Just pick one that came out in a positive light and use it.
Oh, that's really good stuff. I love that because I've got that one on a lot of phone screens where they go, "Well, tell me of a time when you had a disagreement." And then you got to talk to this whole thing. But obviously,
Yeah.
what would be a red flag if someone said something on one of those questions that would make you go, "Nope, not happening."
Uh, I've never had a disagreement with a coworker
Really?
because we're all human. I mean, we're all human, and it may not even be like it may not even be a disagreement. It may just be like where that individual, either you or I mean, we're in our role, and we get frustrated with a coworker,
Mhm.
and it may not even be like an argument between the two of us. But say you did something at work, it frustrated me. You have no idea I'm frustrated, but if you're able to go to that individual and have that difficult conversation and talk to them about like whatever whatever you did to frustrate me, and we are able to work through it, that's a great example in itself. And I mean, I think anybody could say that they had a frustration at work at any point in time.
See, that's a fantastic example. On that phone screening call, are there any other kind of red flags that you would be listening for when you're talking to people that make you go, probably just not right for the role?
The biggest red flag, and the one that drives me the most nuts on any phone interview, is the very first question I always ask is, why did you apply to this organization and why did you apply to this role?
Uh-huh.
And 90, I'll give it probably 80% of the time, they'll only speak to the role itself and they won't speak to the organization. So for me, it's like you didn't do any research into the company. You obviously you know the role, you know it's a full stack or a front end or whatever it may be. You know the role, and it's because that's what you want to do. You want to be in a front end developer role, for example, but you didn't do the research in the organization, because I'll follow it up and be like, so what was it about XYZ company that has you interested in wanting to join us? And they don't have a great answer. And that is, for me, that's a red flag.
Okay.
And so yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I was going to say, how much? Okay, so if you got a couple phone interviews, how much research should I be doing about the company? Like, I mean, for example, Haggerty, there's tons of stuff online. They're a publicly traded company, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I could spend hours researching stuff. So, like, what's the sweet spot?
I would just have that baseline knowledge. Like, what does the company do? And I mean, that's the biggest thing. If you can tell me like what Haggerty does, Haggerty, classic car insurance company, automotive enthusiast brand. They have like car shows and garages that they have. Like, if you have a baseline knowledge, that's good for me, because it shows that you at least Googled Haggerty and have an idea of what the company does. It's the people that don't even Google it. I'm like, man, I get the fact that you might be applying for a lot of jobs. And this is one of 10 interviews that you've had this week, but you came to this phone interview and you didn't at least Google Haggerty.
Uh, that's crazy. Okay, so we'll take one more step back here to get into kind of that job funnel of different places, because sometimes you do
Mm-hmm.
apply and you don't hear anything back. So we talked about reaching out on LinkedIn. Is there any other examples or ways you could think of people should apply for jobs, or should they just spend all their time focusing on LinkedIn and applying for jobs?
There's there's actually, IT probably has some of the best platforms out there for when it comes to applying to jobs that a lot of recruiters will utilize. We used to post jobs on Dice.
Okay.
So Haggerty has its own Dice platform. So it's got its own brand page. It has its own job postings on there. And so we'll go through Dice as well. When I was at Tech Systems, we used all of them: Career Builder, Indeed, LinkedIn. Um, but as far as like what really makes a person's resume stand out, just making sure, like, if you truly have all the buzzwords that are in that job description, make
Uh-huh.
sure they're in the top in that skill section, because the ATS will pull them and highlight them all, and we're going to see them right in that skill section, just bright yellow. It's going to look like the whole paragraph's highlighted essentially, and you got to have them in that experience, but it's tough. Um, I'd say to anyone that, and I'm in the market right now applying to jobs, it's a waiting game and it is difficult, but like the biggest thing too, don't hesitate to reach out to like a staffing organization that is out there too. If you are struggling, um, there's some really good ones out there. It's more about finding the right recruiter, because when you go through a staffing organization, you straight up tell them, I want contract to hire or I want direct placement. And they will look for either of those roles. And staffing agencies always get their resumes straight to the top of the pile.
Oh, really? Why is
A
that?
lot of a lot of times they do, because they're sending resumes directly with all the information around, like, what is the person looking to make, why does their experience align. They typically have some references on there, and they're very enticing for managers because it's all right there, and they're already essentially, we call it pre-screened.
Okay.
So they've already had like a pre-screen with a recruiter. um, so if you don't have a good relationship, I would build a good relationship with a recruiter, even if you're not looking, just because they could be useful down the road. And they have a lot of direct contact relationships with managers, C-levels, directors at pretty much all the Fortune 500 companies that are out there.
That is awesome. All right, let's wrap it up on this one. We talked a lot about optimizing your resume, phone calls. Are there any application processes or uncovered mysteries that from the other side that you think developers should know, or is there anything we missed that you want to share with people about that process?
I think, obviously if you can have like a portfolio prepared, or if you apply with a hyperlink to your portfolio on your resume, that's always extremely helpful and useful for managers and the recruiter, because they can use it to see your proficiencies and kind of be able to analyze some of the code that you've been able to do. Having that GitHub, any websites that an individual has developed, I'd make sure that those are stated on that resume as well. And I think the biggest thing, anytime I've ever recruited for development roles, the people that come into those interviews and bring confidence, and if they have that confidence about them, that takes away any of that quirkiness, and just speak about like your experience and be confident in your abilities to be able to code and pick up new languages and really run with them. Those are the individuals that always make it past the recruiter, and they'll typically do very well with those hiring managers.
Well,
But as
fantastic.
but as far as like any resume, like there's no real hidden trick when you're applying. Like, what can you do with your resume? The biggest thing, skills section, well thought out, and anything in that skill section, really make sure it's in the body of that resume under your experience, because that's where they're going to look for it.
Awesome. This has been fantastic. I've actually learned a ton during this process, so I appreciate it. And thanks for taking the time to come do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the invite. And it was a great time. I really enjoyed it.